Hi everyone. So this is a video of the hybrid Jewish studies class, 8 o'clock class from 10:10. If you missed class and you want to get credit for your 8-point credit, this needs to be handed in by Friday. The questions can be emailed to me, slight@tarbut.com. So Kate asked a question this past week about sitting in a sukkah that just had a small little wall. I wish I could actually, maybe I can draw it. So she asked the question about a sukkah that kind of looked like this and had a kind of a wall down much lower than, and she was like, how come that worked? How come that is allowed? And what we talked about in class today was there's a principle called gud asik, which means actually if there's a small little piece of a sukkah down below, like a little wall, and there is some kind of thing right here, either a string or a board of wood. Oh, that shouldn't happen. Or a board of wood right here. This board of wood right here is called a tsurata petach. You don't need to know this word. It's called tsurata petach. And if there's a tsurata petach, meaning there's an up here and there's a lot of space and there's a down here, the principle of Gura Sikh says basically the walls of this sukkah extend upward like that. Now, one of the questions is, well, why doesn't that law work when we were talking about our sukkah of the um, of the animal, right? And there's a bunny rabbit right there. And how come that animal body doesn't go up and create a wall no matter what, even if it's lying down? And the answer is there was no tsurata petach. Um, there was no piece of wood, line, or piece of board. We also talked about the idea of this idea of there being a string, and is actually the idea of an eruv, basically what allows someone to walk on Shabbat out of their house, right? So technically on Shabbat, if you have a house, oh, that's supposed to be a house. If you have a house, you're not allowed to carry outside of that house. But if you had a wall around that house, you could actually carry. However, what if I want to carry in an entire community? Well, that means creating a wall around that community, which of course you can do sometimes, but an easier way is creating an eruv, which is like a fake joint wall. And how do you do that? Well, basically, if I have two phone lines and I kind of make two small little pieces of wood here, and I make a surata petach, a wire that extends from one to another. It's as if this is all filled in as a wall, and if I do that around the entire city, I can carry within that city. So we have one of those down at University Park, which means that you can carry outside of your house on Shabbat, and it's called an eruv, which means it mixes all those houses together as if they're owned together, and I can go ahead and walk. So no questions so far. That was just kind of thinking. Let's move on. Okay. So what I did today was we went around the room and to try to get a full kind of sense of the Talmud piece that we just studied. So the first thing I asked was, um, I'm just getting my writing down my answers too. So the first thing I asked was, what was the very first part of our Talmud? The very first thing that happens is we have this general statement, which comes from a Braita. First of all, what is a Braita? Because this here is actually coming from a, no, sorry about that. This here is coming from a Braita. Okay, this is a Braita right here. And it says, Asa'al lebehema dofen l'sukkah. Someone made a sukkah with one of its dofens, one of its walls, is a behema, an animal. Rabbi Meir says that is pasul, that is not allowed. Rabbi Yehuda says that is an okay sukkah. Rabbi Meir says that is a not okay sukkah, pasul. Rabbi Yehuda says that is a kosher, machshir. By the way, what is a Breita? That's your question number one. Answer, what is a Breita? A Breita is a teaching that is as strong or important as a Mishnah, but for some reason, the editor or writer of that Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, decided for some reason or another it didn't get in. I have no idea why, but it decided it doesn't get in. Okay, so this is what it's saying. If there is, so summarize what we know, what the Breita says. That's question number two. Okay, and then question number three is now we're up to the Talmud. The Talmud asks the question, "What in my taima de Rabbi Meir? What is the reason for Rabbi Meir? Meaning what? What is the reason? This is question number four. What is the reason for Rabbi Meir? What? What is the reason for Rabbi Meir saying that when I see a sukkah that has one side of it being an animal and not an actual wall, I say that sukkah is not kosher? Rabbi Yehuda says, when I see that same sukkah, if it has an animal as one of its sides, I say it is kosher. Okay. The next step is that we now are inside the Talmud, right? And now we're talking, now the people talking, Rabbi Abaye and Rabbi Zera, are called Amoraim. Amoraim, people talking in the Talmud. The people talking up here, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, they lived much earlier in Israel. They are called Tanaim, people talking in the Mishnah. Amoraim lived in Babylonia and lived much later. So here they are in Babylonia, asking the question, my taima de Rabbi Meir. What is the reason for Rabbi Meir? By the way, why are they even asking this question, do you think? That's question number 6. Why are they even asking? You know what? They're probably asking because they don't know the answer. They got this statement, this Breita, and they want to know why it is. So they're starting to think, what could possibly be the reason of Rabbi Meir? Or maybe they know, maybe Rabbi Meir was their teacher, right? And he told them this. But they don't know because they're coming up, we have two different ideas. Abaye says that the reason why Rabbi Meir says, when I see a sukkah with one of the walls being an animal, I say it is not kosher because maybe that animal will die. Rabbi Zera says, no, the reason I make that, I call that unkosher, is because maybe that animal will run away. So what's the next thing we do in the Talmud? Do you remember question number 7? What's the next thing we do? What's the next thing we do? We go and say, let's try to figure this out using a real life example. And let's pick a peel, an elephant. But not only let's pick an elephant, let's pick an elephant that is in some way tied up and restrained. So when it's that wall of the sukkah, it is tied up, right? So it's not moving at all. Okay, so here we go. Now that's pretty interesting because all of a sudden now we have an interesting situation, right? So it's a tied up peel. It's a tied up animal, so it's not moving. So all of a sudden, Rabbi Zera's answer, perhaps that animal will run away. Will it run away? Yes or no? That's question 8. Of course it won't run away, but why? Question number 9. It won't run away because it is attached, right? It is attached there. And what about if it dies, according to Abaye? Why would that, let's imagine that an elephant that dies, is that going to be a kosher sukkah? And actually, what we learned last week is an elephant is a big thing. So if it dies, it only has to be a kosher sukkah. The wall has to be 10 tfachim high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the sukkah would still be kosher. So none of these reasons actually would work. None of these reasons tell me that this is an unkosher sukkah. And that's why we end up with this term, kule alma lo plige, meaning everyone, meaning Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Meir, whenever they see a peel that is kashur, whenever they see an elephant that is in some way tied up and acting as the wall of the sukkah, what are they going to both agree? That's question number 11. They're both going to agree that in that case, that sukkah is kosher. Okay? So What does that mean? If we know that the original Breita says Rabbi Meir, an animal with that is the wall of a sukkah is unkosher. Rabbi Meir says it's pasul, not allowed to use. Rabbi Yehuda says it is allowed to use, and we just learned in the case of the peel that is kashur that it's going to work even if it dies, and it's never going to run away. So what do we need to do now? We still need to find the case where Rabbi Meir would say something is not kosher, because this is a case where everyone, both Rabbi Yehuda and both Rabbi Meir, would say it is kosher. Okay, so let's try our new case. And what's our new case? Question number 13. What's our new case? Our new case is an animal that is not tied up. Oh, so now this is interesting. Well, let's think about the two reasons. Rabbi Zera says perhaps that animal will escape. Well, actually, that's kind of true, right? Perhaps that animal will escape. And you're right, that would be a reason why Rabbi Meir might say that that wall is lo kasher, is not kosher. But Abaye, who says perhaps that animal will die, if the elephant dies, well, it's still going to be tall enough. But the problem is, the dying shouldn't just concern Abaye. Also, the running away should concern Abaye, because when the animal dies, he's surely not going to die standing there right next to the wall. No animal, no elephant is trained just to stand right where he is. So Abaye, even when the animal dies, it's probably moved away as well. So he also has to agree that he's going to have trouble keeping that wall to be kosher. And so we come up with this statement again. Wait a second. Kule alma lo plige. The entire world, question number 14, agrees, doesn't disagree, meaning the entire world agrees that if I have an animal making up one side of the sukkah and the animal is not attached at all, the entire world, meaning everyone, meaning both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, agree that that kind of sukkah is what? That's question number 15, is lo kasher. So again, going back to our original statement, we know that there is a case where an animal that makes a wall of the sukkah, we have a disagreement. One of them is going to say that's not kosher, Rabbi Meir, and one of them is going to say it's kosher. But we've learned up to now that an elephant that is connected to the sukkah, they're not going to disagree. They're both going to call that what? They're both going to call that kosher. And an elephant that's not connected, everyone's going to call that what? Everyone's going to call that not kosher. So here's our problem, because we know that there is a case where Rabbi Meir does say it's not kosher and Rabbi Yehuda does say it's kosher. What is that case? We haven't figured it out yet. It's not a case of the bound up elephant. It's not a case of the non-bound up elephant. So what could it be? And that's what prompts the Talmud now to change the scenario. It's not the scenario of the bound elephant. It's not the scenario of the unbound elephant. It must be something else. What could it be? Aha! It could be the case of the deer. So a deer is kind of interesting. Why is a deer different than an elephant? A deer is different than an elephant that actually, when it dies, it's not going to be that tall after all. That's kind of interesting. Now, first of all, we have these two possible things that we could kind of go through now. We have the deer or an animal that is less than an elephant that is tied up, and an elephant that isn't tied up. We're actually, of these two cases, which are the cases that we actually have to worry about if our goal is to find a case where one of them says it's allowed and one of them says it's not allowed? Which is the case that we need to be worried about? That's question number 17. This is probably the hardest question of our day. Did you get it right? The case that we don't have to worry about is the case of the animal that is not tied up. So this case right here. Why is that? And that's question number 18. Why is it that we don't need to be worried about the deer that is not tied up? We don't need to be worried about the deer that is tied up because everyone, meaning Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, Abaye and Rab Zera, would all agree that a deer that is not tied up and is part of a wall of a sukkah, we're going to call that sukkah kosher or not. We're going to call that sukkah lo kasher. So the only case we're really going to be dealing with is the deer that is not an elephant, but something smaller that is tied up. Okay, and so what is our possible problem? Well, obviously, it's not going to be Rab Zera's problem. Perhaps Shema Tivrak, perhaps it will escape, because why won't that be a problem? That's question number 19. I'm just writing the answer here. Right? It's not a problem because he's tied up. But what happens, Shema Tamud, Abaye's, is actually legitimate. What happens if it dies, and what would be the problem there? But before we get there, we have a couple other problems, right? We have a couple other problems. And one of the problems is, what about that space if you agree that a deer that is tied up is a proper wall of a sukkah? What about that space right there? Maybe that's what actually that's why Rabbi Meir says that this kind of sukkah is pasul, is no good. And then when Gemara comes back, do you remember what it says here for question number 21? It says, don't worry about it. We can put branches right there and cover up that hole, even if it's more than how many tefachim? Even if it's more than 3 tefachim. And then we have another question. Oh, what about if it lies down? What if it gets tired? Then we have a problem. What's that problem? Question number 23, right? The problem is it is less than the required tefachim for a sukkah. And what is that number? That number is 10 minus 3 equals 7. And then we have an answer. The Gemara gives an answer. Don't worry about that. What's the answer the Gemara gives here? The Gemara says, the answer is I will figure out a way to keep that animal suspended with a big pulley system. So it will never be able to fall down at all. It will always have to stand. Okay, so it looks like actually we never have a case that Rabbi Meir is going to call pasul, right? Because we have all the possible ways that we thought that maybe this is why Rabbi Meir would call a smaller animal pasul is not, because it's held up by pulleys, the branches are filled in. So we still haven't found that case. But here it comes now. There is a case. Oh, what is that case? Well, that case is the following. The case is, if we'll see if you remember it for 25. So here's the case. The case is, suppose because of that principle of I can have a gap of 3 tefachim, that instead of getting an animal that's 10 tefachim high, I only got one that was 7 tefachim high. And using the pulley system, it stands full right at 7 tefachim. But when that animal dies, it droops its head, and all of a sudden it's no longer 10 tefachim, but the person who built it never realizes it. And here, look, here's Rameir. OMG. The animal died and he didn't realize that he's now sitting in a non-kosher sukkah. So all of a sudden, we have found it. This is the case that this is why Rabbi Meir said, lo kasher. Because there might be a deer that is only 7 tefachim high, and even though you cover the space between its legs with branches, and even though you pick it up with a pulley system and never let it fall, because it was only 7 tefachim high, and it dies, it might be droopy, and you would think it's still fine because you're not paying attention to that, but actually it's less now than 7 tefachim, and that wall is no longer kosher, and that sukkah is no longer kosher. So here's where we are. That was all last time. Now, so interestingly enough, when we first saw this statement by Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and you were given this statement and nothing else, if I find a sukkah with an animal being one of the walls of the sukkah, what am I going to call that sukkah? Can I use it and can I not? So suppose you're Rabbi Meir walking down the wall, and all you had was that breita right here. Just this. Nothing else that comes next. Just this. Every time Rabbi Meir sees a sukkah that has an animal as a wall, what is he calling that according to the breita? He's saying, question number 26, he's saying what? He's saying that sukkah is what? It is. And every time Rabbi Yehuda sees that exact same sukkah, what is he saying? That sukkah is 27. Meaning, so now let's say there are 100 sukkot that all use an animal as a wall. According to, if you only had this breita, you would think that Rabbi Meir would say how many of those sukkot would be lo kasher. 20, question 28 and 29. How many of those sukkot would Rabbi Yehuda say is kasher? And the answer to that question is 100%, 100 of them. Basically, according to the breita, every single sukkah that has an animal as the wall, Rabbi Meir says no. And every single sukkah that has an animal as one of the walls, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say yes. But then we get to the Talmud. And what does the Talmud say? No, not at all. It's not like that at all. You might have thought that Rabbi Yehuda Meir always, always, always disagreed with Rabbi Yehuda. But actually, what we now know is there's only this one little bitty teensy-eensy case where Rabbi Meir disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so first of all, we learned a word in class that kind of describes this very specific case, and that's called an okimta. When we established that the Mishnah, when it's talking, or the Breita, when it was talking, it wasn't talking about every single case. It was talking about a very, very, very simple, very, very narrow case. Sometimes the Talmud also says the words b'mai okimta. What are we dealing with? What is the case that we are actually dealing with? Okay, so now the big question is why? Why is this the case? Why is the Talmud doing this? What is the Talmud trying to tell us about something larger? Not about a sukkah. I don't really care about a sukkah right now, right? Maybe I do on Sukkot. But there's something happening here as we move from Breita to Talmud that I've done. I've done about this big, big time disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. What have I done? Question number 30. And why? What is this trying to tell me about some kind of larger value of this whole piece altogether? So question 30 is what's trying to tell me, and 31 is what's that larger value. And some of the things we talked about in class were maybe it's telling us something about disagreements in general. Maybe it's saying that when we look at disagreements, we're often thinking that people are 100% this way and the other person is 100% this way, and they're so far from each other. But actually, through the Talmud, we realize that their disagreement is really not that much. They actually, maybe they agree more times than they disagree. And that's kind of interesting, right? There's more, it's basically saying, you thought that they disagreed so much, but really, in the end of the day, they do not disagree as much as we think they do. So it's almost saying, hey, if you see two people disagreeing, look closer. Maybe they're not disagreeing as much as you thought. And Eitan said in class, hey, you know what it's saying also? It's saying like this case of in order to be on the Sanhedrin, you have to find 50 reasons why something is kosher, 50 reasons why that same thing is unkosher. And that's kind of what the Talmud is doing here, is saying, you know what, for even something that appears to be not kosher, there are a lot of ways that it could be kosher. Even something that appears to be kosher, there are a lot of ways that it could be unkosher. So I think that's a really interesting thing here. Lastly, first of all, question number 32. Why is it, and we answered this actually earlier in class, Why is it that the Talmud never deals with the deer, the smaller one, after it doesn't dealing with the peel, the elephant? It could have dealt with the smaller animal that is not bound up. Why doesn't it have to deal with that for some reason? Okay, that's question 32. Um, okay. Now I want to do one last thing. What makes this a beautiful piece of Talmud is there's a nice order that it goes in, and I put it in different colors here, from a peel kashur to a peel she'eno kashur to a behema kashura to a an elephant that's attached, an elephant that's bound up, an elephant that's not bound up, to a smaller animal that's attached, to a smaller animal that's attached and has the branches in the middle of its space, to a taller animal that's attached that has the pulley system on it, right? Now, here's something really interesting. It's a beautiful order that it goes in, but why? I mean, there's a person who created this Talmud, right? And that is called the Stam. The Stam Talmud is the editor of the Talmud. We're not quite really sure who that actually is, but there's a reason. Our sense is the editor of the Talmud has all these different pieces, all these different laws, and he kind of puts this together in a nice way. But why? Why did he choose this way? Meaning, if we know the answer at the end is that the reason why Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda disagree is because of the case of the 7 tefachim high small animal, even though it's held up by pulleys, even though it has branches in the space, when it dies, it's going to be a little bit shrunken, and the person's going to think they're in a kosher sukkah when they're really not, and that's why Rabbi Meir says no. Why don't we just start with that? Why do we need this full discussion of the elephant who's tied up, the elephant that's not tied up, the animal that's tied up? Why don't we just go right to the answer? Why include all these things before? Why did the editor set up all these different pieces? And so we're going to call that question number 33. We had some neat answers in class. And just so you know, like, no one really knows the answer to that question. Actually, there are people who write doctoral pieces on Talmud are always asking that question. Why is it organized the way it's organized? Okay? Good. And that's what I say. Imagine you're the stam in this photo. Okay. Now we're moving on. We're moving now on to this other piece of Talmud that we talked about just for a second when we talked about Rosh Hashanah. We had this case of Rabban Gamliel who had a diagram of different forms of the moon on a tablet that hung from his attic. He would show it to lay people who came to testify about the new moon, so they were able, and he would say, did you see the moon like this or the moon like this? Big problem. What was the big problem we talked about in class of Rabban Gamliel having something like this? Of course, the big problem is it says in the Ten Commandments, don't make a sculptured image or a likeness of what's in heaven above or the earth below or the waters underneath. Don't do something like that. Meaning, Rabban Gamliel has made a colossal error. He's gone against the Ten Commandments, and his diagram shows it. By the way, it also says in the Torah, do not make with me gods of silver and gods of gold. Do not make them. Oh my goodness. So one thing we could do is we could say, Rabban Gamliel, sorry, you just violated the Torah. You are no longer the head of the Jewish people. You're gone. You're out of here. Or we can do something else. Or we can say, you know what? Torah shebichtav, written Torah, you are 100% true. Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Mishnah, Toshba, the oral Torah, Rabban Gamliel, what you did was 100% true too. Not saying either this is right or this is right, either this is right or this is right, saying both of them are right. And that's exactly what the Talmud is going to try to do here. The Talmud is going to try to say, actually, one of these can be correct and the other one can be correct. However, when we look at these two things, we say one is doing one thing and one is doing completely the opposite. One is saying, no, you're not allowed, and the other one is doing that exact thing that's not allowed. So the question is that I have for you, this is the final question of the day, is what kind of moves can we, if we're the Talmud, what kind of moves can we make in order to show that the Torah is right and in order to show that Rabban Gamliel is right? And I believe there are two moves that can be made. What do you believe are those two moves? This is question 35A and 35B. What are the two moves? I'm just writing this down. Okay, and here we go. Two moves that the Talmud can make. One, the Talmud can look at the Torah and say, you know what, reader of the Torah, you think you understand what the Torah is saying. And if you're correct in your understanding of the Torah, Rabban Gamliel is a sinner. He has done something completely 100% no go. A-O-N-O, no. He's out of there. But that's because you don't really understand what the Torah is saying. Look again, my friend. Look again at what the Torah Shebichtab, the written Torah, is saying, and you will realize that it is saying something else, something different than you thought. And once you understand what it's really saying, you'll know that Rabban Gamliel, what he did was not so bad after all. That's move number one. Move number two is in the opposite direction. Don't look here, but look at what Rabban Gamliel did. And the Talmud could say, you think that Rabban Gamliel did something wrong, but think again. Look more closely about what he did, and I'm going to prove to you that he didn't do anything wrong. What it looks like is not really the whole story. So, for your final piece, let's kind of give that a try. Okay? Let's give, right? So basically, it's either I think I understood what the Torah means, but I really don't. If I did, I'd see Rabban Gamliel acted 100% okay. Or I think I understand what Rabban Gamliel says, but I really don't. If I did, I'd see that Rabban Gamliel acted 100% okay. So give me, for question number 36, give me one possible way, one possible move that the Talmud could use to say, I think I understood what the Torah means, but I really don't. If I did, I'd see Rabban Gamliel acted 100% correct. What could be that move? What closer reading of the text could it make to say actually it doesn't mean what it says? That's question number 37. 36, and question number 37 is do the same thing with Rabban Gamliel. What possible thing could the Talmud say to convince us that we think that what Rabban Gamliel made, this tablet with the star, the moons on it, we think that's 100% no-go, not okay. But actually, if you knew the real story about this diagram, you'd say it was just fine. What's one thing that the Talmud might be able to say? And that comes to the end with 37 questions, the end um, of our video. Get me your answers for your full 8 points by Friday.